What happens when the very system designed to protect us becomes the weapon used against us? What occurs when prejudice runs so deep that it blinds those in power to the truth standing right before them? A woman stripped of her identity, her dignity, and her freedom thrown into one of the most dangerous male prisons in the state because someone looked at her and decided she didn't fit their narrow definition of femininity. They saw her strength and mistook it for masculinity. They saw her confidence and labeled it as threatening. They saw her dark skin and made assumptions that would change her life forever. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't have imagined, in their wildest dreams was that the woman they were throwing to the wolves was someone who had spent years hunting wolves of her own. Someone who had served her country in the shadows, conducting operations so classified that her own family didn't know the true extent of her service. Someone whose training had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than anything there. Prison system could throw at her dot. This is the story of Commander Sarah Phoenix Thompson, a woman whose journey from the battlefield to the courtroom would expose the ugly truth about racism in America's justice system. It's a story about the price of being black and female in a world that often sees both as threats. But more than that, it's a story about the unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to be broken, who turned her darkest moment into a beacon of hope for countless others. Her story will make you angry. It will break your heart. But ultimately, it will inspire you to believe that even in our darkest systems, truth and justice can still prevail if we have the courage to fight for them. Sarah Thompson grew up in the 9th Ward of New Orleans, where she learned early that the world wasn't built for girls who looked like her. Born in 1985 to a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, Sarah understood struggle before she understood algebra. But what made Sarah different wasn't just her circumstances, it was how she responded to them. While other kids in her neighborhood were learning to navigate around trouble, Sarah was learning to navigate through it. At 14, she was already 5'8", with broad shoulders and a presence that commanded attention. Teachers often mistook her confidence for aggression, her direct communication style for insubordination. She was suspended twice for intimidating behavior, once for staring at a teacher who had made a racist comment about Hurricane Katrina victims, and once for refusing to back down when a white student called her the N-word. The racial climate of early 2000s New Orleans was complex and layered. Post-Katrina displacement had created new tensions as communities were scattered and reconstituted. For young black women like Sarah, the intersection of race and gender created a double burden. Research shows that black women in the criminal justice system face unique challenges where issues of race, racism, class, and power significantly impact their interactions with law enforcement and the justice system. Sarah's mother, Maria Thompson, worked as a janitor at the local military recruitment office. It was there, while waiting for her mother to finish her evening shift, that 16-year-old Sarah first encountered Army recruiter Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Unlike the teachers and administrators who saw her size and demeanor as problematic, Rodriguez saw potential. "You know what I see when I look at you, young lady?" he asked one evening as Sarah sat in the waiting area, working on homework under the fluorescent lights. "I see someone who's been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for so long that she's forgotten she doesn't have to carry it alone." That conversation changed everything. Rodriguez didn't see Sarah as a problem to be managed or a threat to be contained. He saw a young woman with natural leadership abilities, physical strength, and an unshakable moral compass. He saw someone who could channel her protective instincts into something bigger than herself. But the path to military service wasn't easy for a young black woman from the 9th Ward. Historical research shows that black women in the military have long faced discrimination, with many reporting difficulties gaining respect and recognition from their peers and superiors. Sarah enlisted in the Army at 18. driven by a desire to serve her country and create opportunities her neighborhood couldn't provide. She excelled in basic training, surprising instructors who had unconsciously expected less from her. Her physical capabilities were undeniable. She could outrun most of the men in her unit and outshoot nearly all of them. But it was her tactical thinking and ability to remain calm under pressure that caught the attention of special operations recruiters. By 2005, women were already being recruited into Delta Force's G Squadron, the classified special operations unit that conducted surveillance and reconnaissance missions. Delta Force had been recruiting women since 1990, bringing them into what was then called the Operational Support Troop for specialized missions, where female operatives were crucial for success. Sarah's selection for this elite unit was unprecedented. She was one of the first black women to be recruited for G Squadron operations. Her training was intense and secretive, involving firearms usage, espionage skills and tradecraft, advanced driving techniques, vehicle instruction, VIP protection, surveillance, and blending into any environment. For 8 years, from 2005 to 2013, Sarah operated in the shadows. She conducted surveillance missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, posed as everything from a journalist to an aid worker, and gathered intelligence that saved countless American lives. Her call sign, Phoenix, came from her ability to rise from seemingly impossible situations. But in 2013, a training accident left her with a severe back injury. Medical discharge brought her home to a civilian world that had no idea how to integrate a woman like her, someone who had seen and done things that would remain classified for decades. On March 15, 2015, Sarah Thompson was working as a private security consultant in Atlanta when her world came crashing down. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Her teenage niece, Kaisha, had been found dead in what police were calling a drug-related shooting. Sarah's sister begged her to come to New Orleans immediately. What should have been a time of grief and family support turned into a nightmare that exposed the deepest flaws in America's justice system. Sarah arrived in New Orleans on March 17th, driving straight from the airport to the scene where Kaisha had been killed. What she found there didn't match the police narrative. Kaisha wasn't involved with drugs. She was an honor student working 2 jobs to save for college. The crime scene showed signs of a struggle that suggested something far more sinister than a random drug deal gone wrong. Sarah's trained eye caught details the initial investigation had missed. Defensive wounds that indicated Kaisha had fought back, positioning of evidence that seemed staged, and witness statements that didn't add up. But when Sarah tried to share her observations with Detective Mark Harrison, the lead investigator, she was met with dismissive hostility. "Ma'am, I know you think you know something about police work from watching TV," Harrison said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But we've got this handled. Best thing you can do is let us do our jobs." The racism was barely veiled. Harrison looked at Sarah, a tall, muscular black woman with short cropped hair and tactical clothing, and made immediate assumptions. He saw someone who didn't conform to his expectations of how women should look or behave. Cases of women wrongly sent to male prisons show that assumptions based on appearance can lead to serious administrative errors, with officials making judgments based on someone's appearance and not much else. Sarah persisted, using her contacts from her military service to conduct her own investigation. What she uncovered was explosive. Kaisha had witnessed a drug trafficking operation run by several local police officers. She had been silenced to protect a corrupt network that went all the way up to the police department's upper levels. On March 25th, Sarah presented her evidence to the FBI field office in New Orleans. Agent Jennifer Martinez was impressed by the thoroughness of Sarah's investigation, but warned her that exposing police corruption would make her a target. "They're going to come after you," Martinez said. "Are you prepared for that?" Sarah was prepared for many things, but not for how quickly and ruthlessly the corrupt system would strike back. On March 28th, less than 72 hours after her FBI meeting, Sarah was arrested on fabricated drug trafficking charges. The same evidence she had documented about the police corruption was turned around and planted on. Literally planted in her hotel room during a staged raid. The arrest was brutal and public. 6 officers in tactical gear stormed into the hotel lobby at 6 a.m., shouting commands and slamming Sarah face first onto the marble floor as horrified guests watched. The local news cameras were already there, positioned perfectly to capture every moment of her humiliation. "Look at this one," Officer Danny Broussard said loudly enough for the cameras to pick up, pressing his knee into Sarah's back as he cuffed her. "Thinks she's tougher than she is. Probably been dealing drugs since she was in middle school." The racist stereotypes were flying before Sarah even reached the police station. The media narrative was already being written. Violent black woman, probably gang-affiliated, caught with enough drugs to suggest major trafficking operations. Her military service was conveniently omitted from all reports, but the most devastating blow came during processing at the Orleans Parish Prison. Intake. Officer Sandra Williams, a white woman in her 50s, looked at Sarah's paperwork and then at Sarah herself with obvious distaste. "Says here you're female," Williams said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "But you don't look like no woman I've ever seen. Look more like one of them ... What do they call them? Transgender things trying to get into the women's prison." This was the moment that would define everything that followed. Williams made a decision based purely on prejudice and ignorance. Decision that would have consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. Sarah's gender marker was changed in the system from female to male, and she was transferred to the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angala, one of the most dangerous male prisons in the United States. Cases of women being wrongly sent to male. Prisons are rare but documented, often resulting from administrative errors based on appearance or discriminatory assumptions. In Sarah's case, the error was deliberative racist punishment designed to put her in maximum danger. Angola Prison was built on the site of a former slave plantation, and that history permeated every brick and bar of the facility. The guards knew exactly what they were doing when they processed Sarah as a male inmate. They were sending a message. Black women who dared to challenge the system would be destroyed. Sarah was placed in General Population Block D, known throughout the prison system as one of the most violent sections in America. The inmates she was housed with included murderers, rapists, and gang leaders serving life sentences. Many had nothing to lose and everything to prove. "Look what they sent us," called out Marcus Bone, Washington, a lifer who controlled most of the drug trade in Block D. "Fresh meat that thinks it's a woman. It's going to be fun." The guards disappeared after lockdown, leaving Sarah alone with 47 violent male inmates who saw her as either prey or a threat to be eliminated. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that they had just locked up one of the most highly trained special operations soldiers in American history. As the lights went out that first night and Sarah heard footsteps approaching her cell, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. A cold, calculating calm descending over her. Her Delta Force training was kicking in, her mind automatically assessing threats, calculating angles, identifying potential weapons, and formulating survival strategies. "Phoenix is in the field," she whispered to herself, using the mental trigger phrase that had prepared her for dozens of life-or-death situations overseas. Mission parameters: survive, adapt, overcome, and extract when opportunity presents itself. The system had tried to break her by putting her in the most dangerous place they could imagine. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They had forgotten that sometimes, when you corner a phoenix, it doesn't just survive the fire. It rises from it stronger than ever. the war for Sarah Thompson's life was about to begin. The first week at Angola was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Sarah Thompson was both student and teacher. The prison administration had made their intentions clear. They expected her to be broken, brutalized, or dead within days. What they got instead was something they had never encountered: a woman who had been trained to survive in hostile territory. Against overwhelming odds, Sarah's Delta Force training had prepared her for situations exactly like this. Women in G Squadron were trained in firearms usage, espionage skills and tradecraft, advanced driving techniques, vehicle instruction, VIP protection, surveillance, and blending into any environment. But more than the technical skills, it was the mental preparation that kept her alive. On her third night, 3 inmates cornered her in the shower area. Marcus Bone Washington and his lieutenants had decided to welcome her to Block D in the most violent way possible. What they expected was an easy victim. What they got was a demonstration of combat skills that left 2 of them unconscious, and Bone himself with a dislocated shoulder. "What the hell are you?" Bone gasped, cradling his injured arm as Sarah stood over him, dripping water and radiating. A calm that was more terrifying than any rage could have been. "I'm someone you don't want to mess with," Sarah replied quietly. "Pass the word. I'm not here to cause trouble, but I'm not going to be anyone's victim either." Word spread quickly through the prison grapevine. The woman in Block D wasn't what she appeared to be. Guards who had expected to find her body were instead filing incident reports about injured inmates who claimed they had fallen down stairs or walked into doors. Nobody was talking, but everyone understood. Sarah Thompson was not to be touched, but survival was only the first challenge. Sarah knew that her situation was unsustainable. She was fighting on multiple fronts, against inmates who saw her as a target, against guards who were either indifferent or actively hostile, and against a system that had deliberately placed her in danger. She needed help, and she needed it from the outside. The problem was that her military service was classified. She couldn't simply call the Pentagon and ask them to confirm her Delta Force credentials. The operations she had conducted, the missions she had completed, the commendations she had earned, all of it was buried under layers of classification that wouldn't be lifted for decades. Her first lifeline came from an unexpected source: Dr. James Crawford, a 67-year-old black psychiatrist who volunteered at Angola. Dr. Crawford had served in Vietnam and recognized something in Sarah that the guards and inmates missed. During their first session, he didn't ask about her crimes or her gender identity. Instead, he asked about her dreams. "I keep dreaming about Kandahar," Sarah said carefully, testing the waters. "About watching a marketplace from a rooftop, waiting for someone who never came." Dr. Crawford's eyes sharpened. Kandahar wasn't a place civilians typically dreamed about with that level of detail. "These dreams," he said quietly, "do they feel like memories?" It was the opening Sarah had been waiting for. Without revealing classified details, she was able to communicate enough about her military background for Dr. Crawford to understand that he was dealing with someone far different from Angola's typical population. Dr. Crawford began making calls, reaching out to contacts in veteran advocacy organizations and military support networks. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, FBI agent Jennifer Martinez was conducting her own investigation into Sarah's case. The evidence Sarah had provided about police corruption was solid, but Martinez needed to move carefully. The same network that had framed Sarah was actively working to ensure she never made it to trial. Martinez discovered that Sarah's gender had been deliberately changed in the prison system, not as a mistake, but as punishment. Intake officer Sandra Williams had admitted to a colleague that she had taught that uppity bitch a lesson by sending her to the men's prison. Williams thought she was being clever. She had actually created a federal civil rights violation. Inside Angola, Sarah was building her own network of resistance. Not all of the inmates were predators. Some, like 34-year-old Anthony Books Johnson, were serving time for nonviolent offenses and were genuinely trying to better themselves. Books ran the prison's informal education program and became one of Sarah's first allies. "You're different," Books told her one evening in the library. "You carry yourself like you've seen things, done things." "Military?" Sarah nodded carefully. "Something like that. I was Army too. 82nd Airborne, 3 tours in Iraq. I can spot a soldier from a mile away, and you're not just any soldier. You've got that look that the special ops guys had, like you've been places where the rest of us couldn't survive." Through Books, Sarah connected with a small group of veteran inmates who formed an informal protection circle around her. They couldn't prevent all the violence, but they could provide early warning systems and backup when things got dangerous. The psychological pressure was relentless. Sarah was fighting not just for her physical survival, but for her sanity. The constant threat of violence, the dehumanizing conditions, and the knowledge that the system had deliberately put her in danger wore at her mental defenses. Research on wrongful imprisonment shows that racism and racial bias significantly contribute to the trauma experienced by wrongfully convicted individuals, particularly Black women who face intersectional discrimination. But Sarah had one advantage. That sustained her through the darkest moments. She knew who she was. She was Commander Sarah Phoenix Thompson, a decorated Special Operations soldier who had served her country with honor. No matter what the system did to her, no matter how they tried to dehumanize her, she carried that identity as armor against their attempts to break her spirit. "They want me to disappear," she wrote in a journal that Dr. Crawford helped her keep. "They want me to become so broken that when I finally tell the truth about their corruption, nobody will believe me. But they made one mistake. They forgot that I've been fighting impossible battles my entire life, and I've never learned how to quit." The resistance was building, both inside the prison and out. But Sarah knew that survival wasn't enough. She needed vindication, justice, and a way to ensure that what happened to her could never happen to anyone else. 6 months into Sarah's wrongful imprisonment, the moment that would change everything came from the most unlikely source: a smartphone. Video recorded by a visitor to Angola prison. Maria Santos was visiting her son when she witnessed what she later described as the most incredible thing I've ever seen. A fight had broken out in the visiting room between 2 rival gang members, and within seconds, the situation escalated into a full-scale riot involving dozens of inmates. Guards were overwhelmed, families were trapped, and children were screaming in terror. That's when Sarah Thompson stepped in, moving with precision and authority that seemed impossible in the chaos. Sarah disarmed the primary aggressor, coordinated the protection of civilians, and organized the other inmates into a defensive formation that protected the families until additional guards arrived. Her actions were calm, professional, and undeniably military in their execution. Maria Santos captured the entire sequence on her phone. The video showed Sarah not as the violent criminal the media had portrayed, but as a protector, someone whose first instinct was to save lives, not take them. But more importantly, it showed skills that no ordinary civilian should possess. Video went viral within hours. Hashtag Who is Sarah Thompson began trending on social media as people demanded to know how someone could demonstrate such advanced tactical skills while imprisoned on drug charges. Military veterans watching the footage recognized immediately that they were seeing special operations training in action. Former Navy SEAL Marcus Rodriguez was one of the first to speak out publicly. "I've worked with a lot of operators in my time, and what I saw in that video was someone with advanced close-quarters combat training. That wasn't luck or instinct. That was professional military training at the highest levels. The viral video forced the media to revisit Sarah's story. Investigative journalist Rebecca Chon began digging deeper into the case and discovered the administrative error that had sent a woman to a male prison. But Chun's investigation revealed something even more shocking. Sarah Thompson's military records were almost entirely classified. When I tried to verify her service history, Chun reported, I hit wall after wall of classification barriers. The Army confirmed she served, but wouldn't provide details about her assignments or the reason for her medical discharge. That level of classification suggests involvement in operations far beyond standard military service. The pressure was building on multiple fronts. FBI agent Martinez had gathered enough evidence to expose the police corruption that had led to Sarah's framing. But she needed Sarah alive and credible to testify. Dr. Crawford was documenting the psychological abuse Sarah was enduring in the male prison. And now, the viral video had turned Sarah into a cause célèbre, with veterans organizations and civil rights groups demanding answers. The tipping point came when Congressman James Washington, a veteran and member of the House Armed Services Committee, officially requested Sarah's military records for a congressional inquiry. The request couldn't be ignored, and it triggered a chain reaction within the Department of Defense. General Patricia Hayes, who had overseen special operations during Sarah's service, was forced to make a decision that would expose one of the military's most closely guarded secrets, the existence and operations of female Special Forces soldiers. Commander Sarah Thompson served with distinction in classified special operations for 8 years. General Hayes stated in a closed-door congressional hearing, her service record includes multiple combat decorations and commendations for operations that remain classified. The suggestion that she was involved in drug trafficking is not only false, but offensive to every service member who has worn the uniform. The revelation exploded across news networks. Sarah Thompson wasn't just wrongfully imprisoned. She was a decorated special operations soldier who had been framed for trying to expose police corruption in her niece's murder. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protests erupted outside the Louisiana state capitol, with veterans, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens demanding Sarah's immediate release. The hashtag free Sarah Thompson trended worldwide as people shared the story of a woman warrior betrayed by the system she had sworn to protect. Inside Angola, the dynamic shifted dramatically. Guards who had ignored or facilitated abuse were suddenly under federal investigation. Inmates who had viewed Sarah as prey now realized they had been locked up with someone whose military reputation preceded her. Even Marcus Bone, Washington, nursing his still aching shoulder, showed a grudging respect. You played the long game, he told Sarah during yard time. Kept your mouth shut, took your beatings, and waited for the right moment. That's some cold-blooded tactical thinking, right? There. But the most important change was in the warden's office, where federal Judge Elizabeth Morrison had just signed an emergency order for Sarah's immediate release, pending a full investigation into her case. After 187 days of wrongful imprisonment in one of America's most dangerous prisons, Commander Sarah Phoenix Thompson was going home. As she walked out of Angola in the same clothes she had worn when arrested, Sarah felt the familiar calm of a mission completed. She had survived the fire, and now it was time to rise from the ashes, stronger, more determined, and ready to ensure that justice would finally be served. Sarah Thompson's release from Angola prison on September 2, 2015, marked the beginning of a legal and social reckoning that would reshape conversations about racism, sexism, and justice in America. But her personal journey toward healing and advocacy would prove to be her most important mission yet. The immediate aftermath was overwhelming. Media attention followed Sarah everywhere as she tried to readjust to a world that had fundamentally changed during her 6 months of wrongful imprisonment. The shy teenager from the Ninth Ward, who had once been intimidated by teachers, was gone, replaced by a woman who had stared down killers and emerged unbroken. The legal victories came quickly once the truth was exposed. The drug charges against Sarah were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled. Detective Mark Harrison and 3 other officers were arrested on corruption charges based on the evidence Sarah had originally presented to the FBI. Sandra Williams, the intake officer who had deliberately sent Sarah to the male prison, was fired and faced federal civil rights violations. Sarah's civil lawsuit against the Louisiana Department of Corrections resulted in a $15 million settlement, the largest wrongful imprisonment settlement in Louisiana history. But more importantly, it forced systemic changes in how prisoners were processed and classified, with new safeguards to prevent gender-based discrimination in prison placement. The case also exposed the broader network of corruption that had led to her niece Kaisha's murder. 8 police officers were ultimately convicted, and the investigation revealed decades of evidence tampering, drug trafficking, and witness intimidation. Kaisha's real killers, 3 officers, who had murdered her to cover up their crimes, received life sentences without parole. But for Sarah, the personal healing was more complex than the legal victories. Dr. Crawford continued working with her, helping her process the trauma of wrongful imprisonment, while also dealing with the classified nature of her military service that prevented her from fully sharing her experiences. The hardest part, Sarah told Dr. Crawford during one of their sessions, isn't what they did to me. It's knowing that there are other women like me, other black women, who face this system every day without the training or resources I had. They don't all make it out. That realization became the driving force behind Sarah's next mission: advocacy and reform. In 2016, she established the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting wrongfully convicted individuals and reforming discriminatory practices in the criminal justice system. The foundation provided legal assistance, psychological support, and reintegration services for people emerging from wrongful imprisonment. Sarah also became a powerful voice in the military community, advocating for better support for female veterans and speaking out about the unique challenges faced by women of color in the armed forces. While she couldn't discuss her classified operations, she could speak about the discrimination and skepticism that female soldiers faced, and the importance of recognizing women's contributions to national security. In 2018, Congress passed the Sarah Thompson Act, legislation that mandated federal oversight of state prison classification systems and required training for correctional officers on anti-discrimination policies. The act also established a federal database to track cases of wrongful imprisonment and their outcomes, creating accountability mechanisms that hadn't existed before. Sarah's story resonated far beyond American borders. She was invited to speak at international conferences on human rights and criminal justice reform, sharing her experiences with activists and policymakers around the world. Her message was consistent: systems of oppression are only as strong as our willingness to tolerate them. The young woman who had once felt powerless in the face of institutional racism had become a powerful force for change. But she never forgot where she came from or the community that shaped her. Sarah moved back to New Orleans, buying a house just blocks from where she grew up in the Ninth Ward. She established a community center that provided educational support, job training, and mentorship for young people in the neighborhood. I could have let what happened to me destroy me, Sarah reflected in a 2019 interview. I could have let the anger and trauma consume everything good in my life. But I realized that my survival wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who comes after me. If my story can prevent even one person from going through what I experienced, then every day I spent in that prison was worth it. Today, Sarah Thompson continues her work as an advocate, author, and speaker. Her autobiography, Rising from the Ashes, A Phoenix's Journey, became a bestseller and inspired a documentary that won multiple awards. But perhaps more importantly, her story has become a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. The story of Sarah Phoenix Thompson is more than just one woman's journey through injustice and back to freedom. It's a mirror reflecting the deepest problems in American society, the way racism and sexism intersect to create double jeopardy for women of color, the vulnerability of our justice system to corruption and prejudice, and the price paid by those who dare to challenge entrenched power. But Sarah's story is also a testament to the indomitable human spirit. It shows us that even in our darkest moments, when the systems designed to protect us instead seek to destroy us, we have the power to survive, to resist, and ultimately to overcome. Her military training gave her tactical advantages, but her moral courage and unshakable sense of self were what truly kept her alive. The changes that resulted from Sarah's case, the legislative reforms, the policy changes, the increased awareness of discrimination in the justice system represent progress. But they also remind us how much work remains to be done. Every day, people are processed through a criminal justice system that is still shaped by centuries of racial bias and discrimination. Every day, women face challenges in institutions designed by and for men. Every day, the powerful attempt to silence those who would expose their corruption. Sarah Thompson's story teaches us that change is possible, but it requires courage. It requires people willing to stand up, speak out, and fight back even when the odds seem impossible. It requires all of us to examine our own biases and work to dismantle the systems that perpetuate injustice. As Sarah herself says, we all have a phoenix inside us, the ability to rise from the ashes of our worst moments and emerge stronger than before. But we have to choose to use that power, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. The question isn't whether injustice will continue to exist. The question is, what will you do when you encounter it? Will you turn away, or will you choose to be part of the solution? Your moment to rise is waiting.